Hello and welcome to Nothing Ventured with me, Aarish Shah. Today, I'm super excited to have with me Eleanor Kaye. Eleanor is the Executive Director at Newton Venture Programme, a JV between London Business School and Local Globe with a mission to level the playing field for typically and structurally overlooked and underestimated backgrounds. Now, in today's episode, we talked about the Newton Venture Programme, the importance of partners like LBS and Local Globe, as well as Silicon Valley Bank. We talk about the difficulties for underestimated people from underestimated backgrounds breaking into venture, as well as the future for the Newton Venture Programme, and much, much more. Let's get straight to it. Hello and welcome to Nothing Ventured with me, Aarish Shah. Today, I'm super excited to have with me Eleanor Kaye, who is the Executive Director at Newton Venture Programme. If you haven't had a chance to listen to her background already, catch our primer, where Eleanor talks all about her time with the CIA and Palantir. No, I'm joking. With Palantir and how she got into Newton Venture Programme. It's really awesome to have you with me today in the studio, Eleanor. It's great to be able to talk through some of this stuff.
Thank you. I'll have to. Sorry, your CIA bit totally threw me off.
That's okay.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
That's okay. Awesome. So look, let's kick straight off. I wanted to understand a little bit more about Newton Venture Programme itself, right? So as someone who works in and around the venture ecosystem, but hasn't actually been within venture capital, like per se as a venture capitalist, it's always been on my mind that I should do one of these courses, try and get a bit deeper into, I guess the way the minds work and how investment decisions are made, et cetera, portfolio construction, so on. Give us a couple of minutes, 5 minutes on what it is that the venture program does and who it's really for.
Yeah, so Newton Venture Programme is a joint venture with Local Globe, Silicon Valley Bankers. Newton Venture Programme is a joint venture with Local Globe and London Business School. Silicon Valley Bank joined as founding partner when we launched back in February 2021 with our first cohort. It was originally meant to be an on-campus programme at London Business School. They really wanted to teach about venture capital, but didn't quite have the connections in venture capital to be able to teach this to the top quality that they obviously do. And so they connected with Saul Klein from a Local Globe, and he was also interested in creating a program, but around diversifying the ecosystem. And that's where Newton was created. And as I said, meant to be on campus over sort of 7-month period. People already in venture capital, but wanting to take that next step. Because what we're seeing is a lot of people are potentially they get siloed into an analyst role, or they're potentially where does this path, how do they get to that GP role? And that's what we're trying to help and support and accelerate. And it's quite a cool program. You definitely wouldn't join that if you were new to venture capital. Mm-hmm. But you potentially would know already what a cap table is and an investment memo and a thesis, and you would have had experience there. But this is taking the next step, to your point around portfolio construction and hearing from the best practitioners around what their experiences are and primarily where they failed. And I think when we've had people on the program, we did our first one last year, it was exceptional, the true honesty that was coming from people and about how hard it was to raise their first fund, to fail on their first couple of deals or potentially not get those returns for the LPs. And that was really quite good because I think it made people feel okay,
more comfortable, I guess.
Yeah, totally. And that was really nice because I think we put, I'm new to the venture capital industry, and it's very close knit. A lot of people know each other. A lot of people, I get reached out to all the time, people wanting to support and help the program, which is awesome. But I think people potentially put people on pedestals and feel like they can't reach out. But actually, that's not the case.
And I think just picking up on something you said there, the industry is massively close-knit, right? It is very much based on relationships that have been built out of business school, out of old school ties. And that's something that's, I think, really frustrating for people that come from outside the ecosystem. Obviously, it tends to therefore, index towards white male kind of privileged sort of backgrounds. And one of the things that I really love about, Newton Venture programs, certainly in terms of its thesis, is that it's trying to help underrepresented, underestimated communities break into venture. I mean, with the caveat that this is a paid course, so I think there are 2 levels, and the foundational course is sort of £2,500. So I would question as to how many people can afford to break in at that sort of price point. At the end of the day, that's quite a lot of money for a lot of people. But what I really love to understand is how do you attempt to make both the program more inclusive, but also break down those barriers and those relationships, that already exist, and make, people that are coming out of your cohort feel like they are part of the ecosystem. Like, how does that work? And I guess I can, from my own experience, I think there are lots of people that are very welcoming in the VC ecosystem, but, it is still that close-knit network. And if you are someone that's coming from a very different sort of mindset or background, it can be really hard and very intimidating, I guess, right, to break into that. So I'd love to get your take on that.
Lots of questions there. So let me start. So
sure.
When we weren't able to launch the on-campus program, we pivoted to a digital program, the Fundamentals program. And that is, to your point, a lower price point, but still not potentially accessible. And we're really lucky that we've got, Phoenix Court Works, which is an offset of Local Globe, SVB and LBS providing grants to help us with scholarships. And that means that, and in fact, we just had a whole new cohort, we've just filled it, and I was able to offer scholarships to everybody who applied.
Amazing.
Whether that's some form of scholarship, but that's to me is extremely important. If we don't want financial barriers to be a reason why somebody couldn't take part in our program, and if you genuinely need that help, then there is financial aid to support you. And that's really awesome that we're able to do that. We're trying to become a sustainable company, which is why we charge. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, I can't pay people to do and support us and work as part of the team. But, we genuinely work as a not-for-profit. So everything gets ploughed back in, goes back into not just the learning, but the access and opportunity that comes from being part of our alumni network. And you said about, once you've taken part in the program, well, what's next? Well, you become a part of Newton alumni. You get access to conferences, you get access to events, and like Sifted conference, we managed to get a load of people in there. Women in VC event that started in Paris last year for the first time. Managed to get some tickets there for people. We're trying to open up doors. We elevate people through my colleague Vicky, our community lead, she writes amazing pieces and elevates people who potentially would never have been shouted about. Yep. And I think what you do here, and anyone who does a podcast and interviews exciting people, you're elevating them and hearing people's stories, and it normalizes that actually your personal and unique journey is so important, and whatever you're doing to support the ecosystem is just as valid as anybody else's, whether you're investing in huge new portfolio companies or you're trying to diversify the ecosystem. And I think you mentioned around what is it they learn at the Fundamentals as well. So it's an 8-week program. It's digital, it's online. So we've got people turning up from all around the world. In fact, we've had like 48 countries coming in, which is pretty cool. And we really embrace everyone bringing in their different opinions, experiences. And we try and take them through the VC life cycle. So from the beginning of what is the VC ecosystem? What is venture capital? If you've never been taught about it. So we provide resources, applied learning exercises where they do in groups or pairs or even alone. And then we also take them from, VC ecosystem to sourcing deals and evaluations. Sourcing deals is really tough, although I'm getting a lot of deal flow now. I have .vc at the end of my email. But what do you do with those deals? Venture valuations, negotiations, legals. I mean, these are all things that are really important in understanding
and massively opaque. I mean, I sit on a group of emerging fund managers, and the questions that are constantly being sort of bandied about are typically around like, okay, legal structures, compliance, FCA regulation, all of these sort of things. Are these sort of topics that you guys pick up on as well?
To some degree in the fundamentals, I think there's an element where we talk about it, but it is a massive part of Module 3 of our fellowship program.
Got it, yeah.
We can't get away with not talking about that. A lot of our fellowship folks are going to become emerging fund managers in the future. And I think, the emerging fund manager era that's sort of like, they're popping up everywhere and it's really exciting. I think it's getting harder to sort of stand out in this place right now. What is your thesis and why are you different and why should someone give you your money? And
you can't get away with just being either Web3 or generative AI now.
No.
You need to actually have some real understanding or I guess, some view that is differentiated enough that, LPs are going to invest effectively, right?
And unfortunately, if you don't have the network or the experience or the backing, how are you meant to, like, if you don't have that, like, and this is typical if you don't know, listeners, like, becoming an emerging fund manager, you're basically an entrepreneur. You're basically, you need to sell yourself and what you're trying to do to people to give you money, and that's draining in itself. It's a very tough job, let alone if you don't have those family and friends around to get you going, or even the network of high net worth individuals. I've met so many people who have raised and it's taken them 18 months and that was 18 months ago, and it's harder now. And I know a couple of people who are trying to raise right now, one in America who's doing a pretty good job, but one that's in the UK who's just been shot with those legal fees. It's massive. Like, how are people meant to get off the ground when you're stuck with like 80k worth of legal fees just to get going, and you perhaps haven't taken a salary for a year? You're probably exhausted from all the no's. You must have to have such a lot of resilience. It must be exhausting.
It's really interesting because you hear a big difference between sort of more established VCs versus emerging managers. And I think emerging managers, exactly you say, much more akin to being a startup founder, I guess. You are constantly on that roadshow. You have to be selling constantly. You've got to be selling to LPs. You've got to be selling to, you've also got to be selling effectively to founders, to potential portfolio companies, because you want them to want your money and your expertise and your network, etc., right? And you are potentially fighting against other people for those great deals. And I think there is always a risk if you're an emerging manager that you end up taking the deals that no one else took, and you've got to really steer clear from doing that, because otherwise you again end up with like a poor reputation, poor outcomes potentially down the track. But for me, I think the thing that's really interesting is, when I first sort of started working within the venture ecosystem, I found it very opaque. And I did think that, for someone from the outside to try and actually break into this would be immensely difficult. What's really encouraging is just the amount of resource and obviously learnings that are out there now. How I guess, you mentioned it earlier, but how open are existing VCs and people in the ecosystem to actually giving their thoughts and the do's, the don'ts, and like, this is, being really candid about where they've struggled. I mean, we've had people on the podcast who are now established, but it took them 3 years to build, their first fund. And that's 3 years of schlepping around, to your point, getting lots of no's. How available, I guess, are people, in the ecosystem to actually give those stories and provide that context?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So, because we're connected with Local Globe, we obviously have a good network of venture capitalists who are willing to support. And, we've had some incredible, Reshma Sahini has come and taught, Harry Stebbings has come, Eileen Burbidge from Passion. We've had like some big names, even, Robin Klein, who is Saul's father, has come and talked on our podcast. And actually, I think, to your point, like, have been very open about providing the reals, like do's and don'ts as well. And we try and back that up with resources and learning through faculty around like the real sort of nitty gritty technical aspects. But we've actually seen a massive outpouring of sort of people saying, how can we support in other ways? So mentoring, for example, people want to support, we've had VC funds reach out to us and said, hey, can we advertise our jobs with you? Can you share this to your network? We want to hear from your network. We believe in what you're doing, believe in the outcomes. How can we advertise with you? But VC jobs are hard to come by. So we have to really think about what other ways can people get into the VC ecosystem. And that's why we specifically say, you necessarily have to become a venture capitalist.
Sure.
You can get involved in the ecosystem in many different ways. And I think about these pathways. So the people who join our fundamentals programs, they're doctors, they're lawyers, they're NHS workers, they're government officials, they're just normal people in their life, like trying to just understand more about venture capital. So people have a lot, out of a 60-person cohort, people have a lot of different motivation, a lot of different reasons to want to learn, potentially because they want to break into venture capital and work in venture capital. That's like one pathway, and that's great. It's quite easy to sort of work that through. That's what you want to do. People get jobs after doing our program because they've learned these sort of basics. They can then answer like case studies that come through. Or they decide it's not for them, which is also completely valid. I'd rather people, take our program and then go, do you know what? That's not for me. But I now understand how the ecosystem works, and potentially they might become a founder.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden they can talk venture capital. They can understand what are they looking for in my pitch deck. How am I going to stand out? How am I going to raise funding? What does raising funding really mean? And so I feel like for education from that aspect is pretty cool. And then they can also go and invest through a syndicate. And I know you've spoken to Paddy from Odin, but there's lots of different ways to invest through syndicates. And syndicates are becoming extremely powerful ways of people who potentially don't have the capital to put in to invest. And that's pretty cool because we've had 3 syndicates created from our program so far. They're really active. They've done investments. And considering we've only been going 2 years, to have 3 very strong syndicates who are investing is amazing. That's an amazing outcome.
I 100% agree. And I mean, Paddy and I have talked about this as I have with, Remy from Vauban as well in the past. But, this sort of opening up of access to really, incredible deals via syndication is hugely empowering. And for a lot of people, and again, we talked, right, underestimated individuals may not have capital. They may not have the, personal balance sheet to be going out there and investing. They may not have access to funds as a VC to invest other people's money, which is obviously, effectively what you're doing as a VC. And actually the ability to write like 1K checks is hugely empowering. It's something that I do and have started doing over the last year and a half as well, because it allows you to, a lot of us that are in the ecosystem see amazing deals daily, or weekly or monthly. And we want to be able to support them, but it's really hard to do that. And I think absolutely, if via the program, there are more people going out there, not necessarily entering VC as an industry per se, but effectively broadening, I guess, access to capital within the VC ecosystem, then that is hugely important. And obviously not just for the ecosystem itself, but for them as individuals, because they're then able to create potentially upside for themselves in the future, which unfortunately has been, a gated kind of outcome for most people up until now. I'd love to touch upon, the relationship with Local Globe, with London Business School. How much access to their alumni do you have? How much access do you have to, the teaching resources? You obviously mentioned that, Newton Venture Program is a not-for-profit, so everything is funneled back in. But, presumably you're able to lean on those resources. Like, how supportive have they been, and obviously Silicon Valley Bank as well, in this whole journey? And obviously, as you progress, right, you've said a couple of years, so presumably 3 or 4 cohorts so far, maybe a few more. How open are they to, adjusting the course as you move forward, or potentially pivoting the course as needs be? Because presumably, as you launch, you'll have learned a lot taking those first couple of cohorts through. It'd be great to understand kind of what that support mechanism and structure is.
Yeah, I've been there since the first cohort that we launched. And if you compared it to what we did last cohort, which was the 4th, it's a completely different program.
Yeah.
we learned loads, and actually the people who took part in the first cohort was so open with feedback and allowed us to build on what we'd done. They were so grateful to be a part of it. Like, it was like a massive movement, and like, it was awesome, but they also want to support us in making those changes. So that's where the applied learning came in. You know, we tried to focus more on the sort of faculty and practitioner learning video type aspect, but actually people wanted to get their hands dirty. And if you like, not force people, but like really encourage people to do their due diligence, like look through some like up and coming businesses, like write an investment thesis and do this in a group and work together. You're essentially like learning through doing, as well as, and then that's that then is then talked about in the classes.
Yeah.
And so your thoughts are then, actually what I did was right here,
Yeah.
or I could have done that. And we provide feedback. We have a load of people who read the investment memos and give feedback on it. So people are hearing like the reality of doing it. Hilariously, although they have great intentions, 80% of the investment memos that were written were about impact-based companies. So I like to think, like, hey, cool, we're bringing up the next generation of venture capitalists that are going to be doing good in the world, which is awesome. But they then, half of them don't invest,
Yeah.
you know, in the fictitious Newton fund. They don't invest in that. And then after that, half of the investors who are marking the theses say, no, they wouldn't invest from there. So I think it's giving a real idea of what that's really like to be working in this world, and how cutthroat it is. You know, how a percentage of how many deals come through actually get looked at or actually get to an IC, an investment committee. So that's pretty cool. And you ask about like Local Globe's investment. So the team actually work out of their offices. So
Amazing.
we attend their team meetings. We're part of like the team there, which has been, like, for me, really impactful in my learning. I then get to pass that on to our cohorts. So that's really cool. I hear about trends that are coming through, super smart people working at Local Globe, and they're so friendly and supportive of the program. And then LBS, now exec education, that's totally new ball game for me. Again, very smart faculty who are teaching really technical venture valuations, for example. Louisa Alameni is one of our board members, but also a professor at London Business School. And her teaching venture valuations is like incredible. You're just sat there going, wow, did I get that? Yeah, I think I got that. I need to go over that again. But, it's a learning curve, right? But they, next week we're going over there for a team day. We get to work at their Regent's Park place, which is it's incredibly beautiful. But also for me, like, I would never have had the opportunity to learn from a London Business School. Like, my background, I shouldn't be here. Like, I should not be having these opportunities.
But that's the imposter syndrome that stops so many people getting back into it. So the one thing I would say is absolutely you deserve to be there. Like, everything you've said shows me that you deserve to be there.
And that's so nice. But I for me, I'm really grateful of these opportunities that I've had in my life to be able to learn from such incredible people. And the faculty at London Business School, that was just not, like, learning from them and hearing how they teach just would have been so far out of my reach. And so I've now, because I work at Newton, I've seen them now teach 5 times and learn something new every time. And that's empowering for me as well. And that shows that, the teaching is working.
Yeah.
And Silicon Valley Bank, they came on as founding partner in 2021, and they've been nothing but supportive. Again, I was talking about conferences, they open that up. They come and teach content as part of our programs. They shout about us online. They're so supportive as partner. They let us teach one of our modules at their offices in Finsbury Square. So, having these supportive partners in various quite different areas of the ecosystem has just been, like, incredible. It's really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. And I think having, really strong partners that are there, at the ground with you, willing to build kind of from the ground up and ensure that it's always relevant and they're providing value. It's hugely important. I mean, there's too many, out there that potentially sit on the sidelines a little bit. But I mean, I would imagine, certainly knowing some of the people at Silicon Valley and having met a couple of people at Local Globe, not having met many people from London Business School, I can well imagine kind of how engaged they are with everything that you guys are doing. I have a couple of questions about kind of the future, right? So one, we're sitting at the moment in January 2023. We've obviously seen a bit of a downturn in the whole economy as a general, but certainly, the venture ecosystem has been deflating over the last sort of 6-8 months, to say the least. So how does that, or will that, or do you think that it should impact kind of what you guys do? And obviously, presumably within the course, you'll be picking up on some of those changes. And how do you actually see the evolution of the program over the course of the next 1 to 5 years? Like, what is the vision, ultimately that you guys hope to achieve? I mean, is it ultimately to have, alumni with a quasi-Newton, fund, as it were? Or is it, just to have as many people in the ecosystem as possible? What would you be hopeful to see over the next sort of 2, 3, 5 years?
So I'll start with the future, right? So right now, like you mentioned, it's a little bit unnerving. Lots of tech layoffs at the moment. It's hard to sort of see what's next. And I like to think of what we're doing at Newton is look, we can focus on the now. We're oversubscribed, which is awesome. We don't want to be too oversubscribed because the whole point is that we're accessible and inclusive, but there's a demand for what we're doing, which is awesome. But I kind of think about it one of our values is around putting the learners first. Mm-hmm. And it would be an easy thing for us to just up the amount of people who take part in our program, especially the digital one. We could just, increase the amount of people. Yeah. But that doesn't give the best learners experience. Mm-hmm. We want people to feel like they can talk, they can ask the professors, practitioners questions without, oh gosh, there's a lot of people looking. So I think Newton's going to continue delivering high quality programs. I'd hope to add something to our product stack at some point, potentially around, emerging managers, building funds, what does that look like? And that's quite exciting because, we talked about earlier on, how can we support that in a more structured fashion? And then as we do sort of continue to grow, move forward in the next sort of 5 years, I think the impact that I'm hoping to see is that the people who are really dedicated to making change, to learning as much as they can, to taking advantage of as many networking opportunities that we can offer, that we're going to see the impact of that. So whether it's, and I've seen people who have taken up fundamentals go on to join new funds. I've seen people, the impact is that they're taking what they've learned and carving out. Yeah. And I don't think we'll really see the true impact because venture capital is a long game. It's not a quick fix. It's not something that you're going to be rich immediately. You've got, thinking about it, 10 years,
Someone recently said to me, venture capital should be your last job, not your first. I think that's the way to think about it. It's you have to play the long game. Otherwise, you don't see the value ultimately.
I guess it's interesting you say that. I think potentially I like to see it as it could be your side hustle or your side game. Yeah. If you've got, I've got pretty strong operator experience at Palantir doing the hyper growth thing. And I think you have to, and this is what we try and get people to do, is to look at themselves and try and think about why is their experience or background important to the venture capital ecosystem. And so yes, we do all the learning and the applied exercises and networking, but actually it's the self-development that can be the most powerful. And we do something called the Fellows Vision on the fellowship program, where people have to think about where are they now? Where do they want to be in 2 years? And where do they want to be in 5 years? And that's been extremely impactful. We had that broken down. People had to do videos, which must have been very difficult. But, how are they really thinking about the future of venture capital and what does that look like? And having that questioned in a room with your peers, very, very powerful. So I think the future of venture capital is being carved out as we move. We've just got to do better in allocating capital as well.
Yeah, I don't think you'll hear any arguments from me on that at all. Now, one of the things you are doing at Newton is a sort of STEM to venture kind of focus. So can you talk a little bit about what that is and how you think that's, why you think that's important for the ecosystem at the moment?
Yeah, sure. So in the UK, we've got a lot of sort of STEM specialists who are stuck in academia. It's like, where do I go from here? I've done this amazing work. In fact, we just ran a sort of day training for 30 PhD students at the Science Gallery, and there's some incredible people doing exceptional things, machine learning, AI,
biotech, all of those,
biotech,
like deep tech,
absolutely. And they don't know what to do with it. Or potentially, if they do know what they want to do with what they've done, they don't know how to get funding. There's the tech transfer element of like, well, if you create something on a university campus, how much does the university
Which has
own?
been a massive problem for a long time, right? For a lot of spin-outs, yeah.
So we believe quite a lot that educating people who have got STEM background, who've got PhDs and potentially don't know where they want to go, educating them on venture capital and what that could look like for the future could be extremely powerful and close that innovation gap that is currently there, because those new biotech inventions are not getting capital because the venture capitalists don't understand what it is, or even how to mark milestones, or what does that how do they know whether they've succeeded? It could be a duplication of a cell, which is massive for that PhD student, but potentially has no
commercial value or no understanding.
Exactly.
And to your point, like the capital structure of those businesses, and also to your point, the milestone is like, unlike software businesses where it's go to market quickly and then ramp from there, with these sort of very deep tech sort of businesses, it's more about the research and development phase early on, and that's very capital intensive before you go to commercialization. And people have to understand, I guess, the cycles that exist there, and the best people, to your point, are presumably those that have actually been at the front line building those sort of
exactly
products, yeah.
And we ran a report last year with Bohurst where it was just, I think we knew what the answers were, but founders with PhDs were more likely to get funding from VCs with PhDs. They understood. So there was a direct correlation between that, and so we also believe that potentially these people that we train could become venture capitalists themselves. And then they're able to spot those milestones and actually like acknowledge, okay, that is a big milestone. This is actually a great invention or product. Like, we need to put money in here. And you're seeing that a little bit more with specifically like maybe climate tech. They're employing people who actually understand the life sciences that are behind that, or machine learning. There are impact focused VCs that are making that hiring change. Octopus, for example, hiring a lot of folks in that area.
Yeah, I just spoke to a few of them earlier this week or last week, yeah.
And that's awesome because, I've got a ton of extremely clever doctors coming through the program.
And presumably, they have that analytical mindset, which also lends itself very well to VC as well, right? Because it's not just about subject matter expertise, it's also about how do you, to your point, like earlier, if you've got 3,000 decks coming across your table every year, how do you actually go through a process of analyzing each of those decks critically and, sifting out really, the ones that could have that breakout, potential. So I think that's absolutely incredible. And just before we kind of wrap up, the podcast is called Nothing Ventured for a reason. It feels like our values are very aligned. What sort of advice would you have for people getting into the VC ecosystem right now, whether or not they take the Newton Venture Program, and especially for those that come from those underestimated backgrounds? What's the one piece of advice that you would give them today to really sort of start carving out their path into this whole world?
Yeah, so one thing I do say to people is just be really clear about who you are and what you can give to the ecosystem, because that can essentially become your superpower and your reason to be employed, or reason to be pulled on as an advisor, reason for whatever. And I think people think that potentially because they grew up in Lagos and haven't got these networks in the UK, that's potentially a bad thing. But the African market is massive.
Huge.
And so I think for me, I believe that everybody has talent there. You might be a super networker. You might be somebody who's got like deep technical knowledge around something. But like there's so many things that people don't view as, because what we're seeing in the venture capital like world is a specific type of person. And if you don't see yourself there, you assume you can't do it. So I think my biggest piece of advice is believe in yourself, see what your superpower is, write it down, and create your own personal investment thesis from that. You know, if you know about the UK market, UK, great. Don't start adding EU in there if you don't understand the EU market. That's fine. It's absolutely fine to say you understand the UK market. Great. What sectors? What sectors do you know about? You know, is that AI or deep tech or climate tech or farm tech or, you know, just femtech, whatever. I think it's just honing down what you know about and have that clear in your mind. And then when you're reading, you know, you can look up pitch decks online. You can have a look at, you know, what's coming through in new companies. But having that in mind will help you really, because I don't know if you follow a lot of people on Twitter or LinkedIn. It's exhausting. That consumption of information is too much,
and often repetitive, and also not particularly value add.
No,
and quite scary, because you come across it and you're like, oh, okay, well, these guys seem to know everything.
Yeah.
How am I going to be able to add value? Right?
Yes, exactly. So I think it's like it manages to drown out the noise. If you're very clear about what you're looking for and what you can give, then it's much easier to drown out the noise that's not relevant. And to be honest, most of it is not relevant.
Amazing. So, Eleanor, it's been absolutely incredible having you here with me today. I think there's a whole bunch of stuff I'd love to talk to you about offline, and maybe we could follow up with some of that later as well. But for those of our listeners that want to find you online, where's the best place for them to look for you? You're on LinkedIn, you're on Twitter. Where can they find you on the interweb?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, so Eleanor Kaye, and Newton Venture Program is the company, and Twitter, I'm Eleanor Kaye_Newton.
Amazing. Thank you so much for spending the time with me here today.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. You've been listening to Nothing Ventured. Let's get back to building.